I'm Amanda Silver.
And I'm Alex Howard.
And this is Dirty Laundry. I feel like every time you go away, like,
it's drama?
there's something that happens. And I'm like, maybe I should never travel with you.
I was going to say, am I jinxed?
I think you might be, because you went to Cuba. And
Let's never discuss that again.
And you came home starving.
And miserable.
And
almost divorced. This one has a happier ending, though, in terms of
my
marriage.
New York.
Yes.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? And you know what
happened?
So the friend who I was with, she is very superstitious.
Okay.
And so we're in the cab on the way to the airport after having the most magical, perfect, beautiful weekend in New York.
Okay.
So we went to go see Hadestown because the love of my life, Ani DeFranco, was performing in it as Persephone. And so we thought, New York, it's a hop, skip, and a jump. Let's just take a quick 24 hours. Let's go see our
home before we know it.
Home before we know it. So it was an amazing weekend. So we're in the cab on the way home, and I'm like, I think that weekend was perfect. I think that was the best trip I've ever been on.
You said that out loud?
And she was like, how dare you? You just jinxed us.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, jinx schminks. Like, this is nothing. I jinxed it.
You did.
I jinxed it.
You did.
Yeah. So Saturday
wait
night,
to say that when you got
trying to fly home. Literally, they started boarding. We watched people go on the plane, and then we weirdly watched them come back off. And I thought, oh, that's strange. And then she held up her phone, and she's like, yeah, flight's been canceled. I'm like, but it's 11 p.m. Yeah, so it was weather, and apparently, we had this wicked heat.
Yes, the thunderstorms, all that.
Like the whole to-do. So, okay, fine. Make an announcement. Great, sorry, flight's canceled. Okay, not ideal, but whatevs. Go back to the customer service for rebooking. Cool, I figure come back at 6 a.m., we'll get you on a flight. No,
okay.
The customer service lady says, so our next available seats to get to Toronto are Wednesday.
Stop it.
And it's Saturday. And I looked at the lady, I was like, good one. So we should come back tomorrow morning? Like, you're obviously
Toronto.
joshing. Yeah, it's Toronto, New York.
It's like they have 1,000 flights
Literally
a day.
flights every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
How is this a thing?
Yeah.
No, we're fully booked. I was like, no, but you're joking. Yeah. Okay, so do we have like a hotel credit?
Yeah.
A per diem?
No, it's weather, honey.
Weather, honey.
Weather, honey.
Did not know that was a thing. Did not know.
Out of their control.
So, long story short, I'm like, well, we need a hotel. I cannot live like this. Like, we're not sleeping at the airport.
No.
This is too much.
Yeah.
So I'm just like quickly on, Expedia or whatever, find a hotel. So it was a pay by the hour hotel.
Stop it.
So you can use your imagination.
You did not.
We barricaded the door with like the table and chairs that came with the hotel room.
Pay by the hour. Grab at the door. I wouldn't go near that bed.
Literally, we like in our clothes, lay down.
You did not.
6 hours later,
I'd rather
sat back up.
No, I'd rather sleep on the airport bench.
I mean,
I don't want to know.
Had there been a refund policy, we may have considered it.
Thank God you didn't come straight from the airport.
I have since showered. But here is where the happy ending really comes in for me.
What kind of happy ending? You're in the pay by hour hotel. I can imagine there's lots of happy endings there.
So we ended up booking a flight on Sunday to Buffalo.
Okay.
And my darling, sweet, amazing husband drove from Toronto to Buffalo to pick us up, to turn around and drive us home. So
good guy.
Otherwise, would have missed this whole recording.
You would have still been in New York.
Listen,
still being stuck in New York isn't the worst thing.
It is not the cheapest option.
Fine.
Though,
aside from that, you're like screwed because yes, but it's not the worst.
But oh man, did we ever dine and we shopped and we had a real good time. So it was
you made it home.
But I've never experienced anything like that. So yes, moral of the story is Alex should not travel. And for those of you who are my friends, steer clear.
But also, you should know better than to book the last flight out of New York.
So now I do.
At night. Because they always cancel and they always delay. And it's a known thing.
It is
so
unknown
you never
to this gal.
book. And I think in anywhere you go, you
guess
should
it makes
never
sense,
book the last flight out because you're taking a chance.
No, fair point.
You really are.
You're really trying to just like maximize.
Of course you are.
But you're
then
right.
You can't get on another flight.
Lesson learned. Lesson learned.
There you go.
So for those of you who are traveling to New York, don't take the last flight out. And don't stay at the Cabana Hotel in Bronx.
Oh my God.
I should have known by the name. It's my bad.
It's not literally by the hour.
Literally by the hour. I know, but you know what? I can cross that off my bucket list of places.
It's not on my list.
I have stayed at an hourly hotel. And I shall never do it again. And on that note...
On today's episode, we have Cinnie Noble, who's the founder of Synergy Coaching. She is a social worker. She's a lawyer. She's a mediator. And she was also Alex's teacher.
Yes.
And she does all things conflict resolution. She's written books about it. So she's really the expert on how to deal with conflict in a healthy way.
Yeah, I learned so much from her about conflict resolution that I use personally, that I definitely use professionally. And she's just brilliant. We are so lucky to have her.
Welcome, Cinnie.
Welcome to Dirty Laundry. We are delighted. I was just saying, before we started recording that you and I did some work together in 2019, which I can't believe that was 5 years ago. It seems
that was 5 years ago.
That's wild. But for our listeners, tell us a little bit about you. What is the work that you do?
What I'm currently doing? Well, most of the time I'm coaching people, mostly I would say in workplaces, private and and public and private organizations, nonprofit orgs, otherwise, and mostly leaders now. So you can coach anybody who wants to be better at conflict. But I think my concentration has been of late mostly coaching people within the workplace and one-on-one, and then training people around the world in the synergy model.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
And so, how did you find that you were into conflict and you wanted to support people through, resolving conflict? How does one stumble into that work?
That's a great question. I probably did stumble into it. That's a really good verb to use here. So I started life out as a social worker, a medical social worker, and I was young and inexperienced and had a degree while I was working. And started to learn about conflict more than I had actually experienced in my own life around the sort of interpersonal things that would happen that I was observing and that I was part of or that I was trying to work with. And I was working with people with disabilities, and I went on to start the first travel agency in Canada for people with disabilities.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of conflict. No, people didn't give people, the attitude towards people with disabilities was like stunning. And I was constantly advocating and in conflict with airlines and hotels and, trying to convince people that people with disabilities can actually travel. Yeah. And the attitude was just, horrendous. And that actually led me to go into, but I was trying to learn some skills, how to manage people in conflict, how to negotiate. And it led me to go to law school. And the idea was that I wanted to work in the human rights field and people with disabilities. And when I came out, I couldn't get work in that area. There wasn't then what there is now. Right. And so I ended up taking a master's in law and ADR. And I'd already started to mediate, and I'd taken mediation courses. And I really thought this is a much better application of what I wanted. I love the idea of peacemaking and being facilitate that. But of course, it's always being around people in conflict.
Yes.
And that led me then through the discovery and research around. There was nobody doing one-on-one coaching, working with people who just want to be better at conflict. Yeah. There are lots of training programs, but that doesn't get to people's sort of idiosyncratic ways of managing conflict. And so that led to me developing a coaching model that I really kind of realized that it wasn't just peacemaking as a mediation, but it was peace building. And that's what I saw, sort of starting from what do people need and want in order to be better at conflict, because it's not a skill that we're born with and necessarily learn in our families very well. So the evolution kind of led me, and of course I'm always around people in conflict. To answer your question in a very long-winded way, I was always around people in conflict and started to realize that conflict needs to be a better experience. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So how do we make that happen?
And then you developed this synergy approach, which I love how you spell it. It's with a C, not an S. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I think it was once I realized that there needed to be a one-on-one process and discovered coaching, which was really a relatively new discipline at the time. This was the 90s. And it started out, really started to develop in the early 90s. This was about 98. And I started to look into it and I went, okay, this is it. And there was nobody doing anything that was one-to-one coaching. Many people get specialties when it comes to coaching, everything from like weight loss to leadership. And whatever it might be, and there was nobody doing conflict. And so it led me to think about, well, how do I take what I'm learning? I took training, I became certified. How do you apply that within the conflict forum? Because it's really different what you do in regular coaching. And so that led me to do a lot of research. And I did a tremendous amount of research, as Alex would know from the training that she took, to find out what was it that what is it that people want and need in order to start to gain a different perspective on their experience of conflict in order to change. Conflict is, to me, about habits that we learn over time. So how do you change the habits? And so it's a pretty intense process. Like, it's not an easy peasy way of trying to shift habits and patterns. Yeah. And so the research that I did led me to find that there really was a way for people to concentrate, pardon me, on how to shift their thinking. And it's really it's a mindset change, it's a heart set change, it's a soul change. It's like, who do you want to be when it comes to conflict, and how are you going to get there? Yeah. And over time, I've refined it, worked with a lot more people, a lot more opportunities to really look at the neuroscience of conflict and understand a little bit more about than I did in the beginning. And that comes more from experience around how do we actually shift behaviors that we have become we love. So we may not love it, but we do it because we don't know any other way. Yeah. And so it took a lot of energy to figure that out, that I just love that I had the opportunity to do that, and clients and people who would play with me while I figured it all out.
Yeah, and in our work that we do in conflict resolution, in a sense, people think that conflict is bad, but we always say it's not necessarily bad. It's how you deal with it, and it can actually be quite healthy.
And it's inevitable.
It's inevitable, and it can be quite healthy in a relationship to have some conflict and to deal with it in a healthy way. And I think by the time people get into our office, they haven't been dealing with it in a healthy way. They don't have the right tools to handle it on their own. And it's kind of reached the point of no return.
The question to follow up, if I may, is, you talk about the shift. And so the way I see it is, people like to be right, and they like things to be fair, and they want to, win, quote unquote. And then are you shifting from that to being something where you're focused more on, the end result, on compromise, on gaining that other person's perspective and understanding of their position? Is that the shift you're referring to, or have we missed the mark entirely?
No, you haven't missed the mark entirely. You know what? The shift is a very personal one. There's not one answer to that. It is what do my clients want and need to do in order to engage more effectively in conflict. It's really about, who do you need to be? What do you want to have happen? What's really important to you? What's it going to take to get there? It'll differ from person to person, and with whom the conflict is. How you want to be with your boss is different than how you want to be with your partner and with your kids. And so it's really about, I think, focusing in and having people identify, because when you think about it, I mean, when was the last time you thought about, who do I want to be in this conflict? We don't take time to think about, we're like in it. And so we don't sort of think about, who do I want to be here? And what's really important to me here? And I think that's probably one of the best questions. What's really important to you here? Is it the relationship? Is it the issues? The idea, to your point, Alex, about, do people want to win? That's I think people learn that competitive thing pretty early on in life about, being the right, being better, and I think at some point there's the shift that many people make who in coaching are, what's most important here? Is it being right? Is that what I'm trying to push? May I make my point and be right for me, and may the other person be right for them? Like, it's how do you sort of shift that thinking to be more open to, there's lots of rights here, and lots of rights to have to be in conflict.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is separating the emotion from the actual issue or your interest, right? That's obviously the work that we do. But it's difficult to do that when you're in it. When you're right? In it. Like how you're fighting about something that is so personal. Like, we're talking about intimate relationships, for example. Yeah. That's so personal, whether it be your kids or it be something in your relationship. Like, how does one, before it gets to the point of it's, we can't really go back. How does one do that?
Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure if this answers exactly, Amanda, but some of what I think around that's coming to my mind is there needs to be emotion. You don't kind of tuck away emotion. It wouldn't be important to you if you didn't feel emotion about it. And so it's really, I think, important that people are able to identify, even say, okay, so this is really getting me upset because X. And I don't know if I can talk about it right now, or I need some time to think about it. It's how do people give their brains and their hearts a bit of a break from the what happens when they get sparked, when they're triggered. And I think being emotional shows how important something is to you, and it also shows how much what the other person's saying is offensive and hurtful. And unless you can be frank about that and have a conversation with people like you, people like me, who are able to get people to identify it's misinterpreted as an offense, and as you're trying to hurt me and you're attacking me, and not, I'm in pain because you want the kids more than I do, or something that people can really get to articulate, and it gets lost in the emotion. But I think identifying that, of course you're going to have emotion around that, and not think you can actually separate it. I think there's sometimes too quick a need to try to get away from the emotion without saying, what's really going on right now? What are you experiencing? What's being challenged for you? And the assumptions that we make and the way we interpret it, to me, is sometimes so off. And unless you get to check it out, I hear you saying X, and whenever that's going to be, it's going to get misinterpreted really quickly. So I think it's how do you use the emotions? How do you identify them? How do you embrace them? It says a whole lot about what's important to you here. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, there needs to be certainly a certain level of self-awareness, right? So, say your ex, your partner, or even your kids, quite frankly, trigger some kind of emotion in you by whatever they say, by whatever their action is. And then it's, as you said, you can feel that emotion come up, but the key is to reflect internally, to pause and say, whoa, this has just sparked something. I need to understand why. Because often it's not even necessarily what they said. Maybe it's how they said it. Maybe you felt dismissed or unheard, right? So it's really about each person's individual experience. And then it's the coming together from those different experiences, from those different perspectives. So yeah, I love the idea of pause, let's walk away. I need a minute to collect myself before I can engage in this conversation. Because to me, in early on in my relationship, my husband, it was very much like, okay, agree to disagree. And that never felt like closure, or it never felt like we actually solved the problem. We just agreed to stop fighting.
Pushed it away.
Yes.
Right.
We dismissed it because we didn't want to be fighting, because that was, uncomfortable or what have you. So we just were like, okay, let's call it quits, everyone back at their own corners, but it was never resolved. And I think that a lot of couples, I don't think we were unique in that. You want to keep going, but it's the silence, it's the pushing away of the conflict that ultimately, again, my opinion alone, results in just the end, because you can't do that anymore, because that piles up. It's like trash, right? It just keeps piling. And all of a sudden you're living in a dumpster and you need to get out. So how can folks, from your perspective and your amazing and incredible experience in conflict resolution, take that pause? Because often you're like, whoa, I need a minute, but the other person doesn't want to give you that minute. So yes, there's respect and all of that stuff, but how can, in the heat of it, how can you sort of pause, go to your corners, and then agree to come back?
Well, I think some of that goes, if it's separate and apart from having a mediator who's there to referee that sort of thing, and to look at that and say and talk about it and put it out there. This is what I hear happening. This is what I see happening. Let's take a break. This is natural. If people want to gain that and learn how to do that, I don't think many couples, including I never did this in my marriage, was to talk about, like, how will we do conflict? It's going to come out. People just don't have that conversation, right?
Yes.
So maybe it's part of as soon as you have your first conflict, saying, okay, we don't know how to do this very well. Like, what are we going to do going forward? Because I can just see this could build up really quickly. Like something that we can be. So, I mean, I was married really young. I wasn't mature enough to think about that and didn't have the knowledge I do now. But most people don't. You know, everything seems kind of rosy. You've had a bit of conflict. You start to build up that trash can that you're talking about, and you don't realize that, you know, it's all of a sudden could be brimming over by the time you're actually together, and then it keeps happening, and that kind of what builds up that amount of acrimony. You know, is there a point of no return? Well, you know, I've seen when I was mediating, and I've seen people in coaching, where how do you go back, whether it's the workplace or home, to say, okay, we never did this very well. Let's reset. What's it going to take? And I remember actually coaching somebody who had a long-term relationship with a coworker that was fraught, but they needed to work together. They actually worked fairly well together, but fraught with a lot of undermining of one another's skills and everything. And my client wanted to figure out a way to how can I go back after all this time? And what he determined over time was that he needed to go back to say, we really got off on the wrong foot about 15 years ago.
Wow.
And here we are, but we're doing really great work. So can we do something about that? And although it wasn't perfect, it was a chance to bring to light what it was if you keep doing this, you know, these things particularly, and people are able to identify what it was. And it was interesting in that particular case. I mean, it didn't end up being perfectly fine for them. A lot of scars were built up by this time, but they had to work together, and they wanted to work together because they were good at it. It was saying, when you do this, I just get put off, and then I'm not productive. So it was how to redo. And I think couples can do that as well, about identifying, you know, these are the things that are totally undermining for me, and there's the type of things that to have a conversation about and to be facilitated if necessary, and probably is necessary, so that the dirty laundry gets out there and gets washed earlier than later. And you know, when I used to see people that were separating and divorcing, it ends up being too little, too late. If you can't, you know, too much is built up by that time. It wasn't early enough. And so can couples start early on by saying, let's just do some healthy, when we get into conflict, what are we going to do about it? And that isn't where people would go very easily, but to me, that's a great business.
It's kind of like talking about finances. It's like the things that you know are going to come up, like arguments about finances or how finances are shared. And obviously conflict and conflict resolution, like deal with those early on.
Yeah. You know, they say wherever there is a relationship, there is going to be conflict. So, you know, you do a lot of work in corporate settings. Amanda and I do a lot of work in the relationship setting. Are there similarities? Like, is it simply just people are raised in different households with different values and different opinions, and they're just always going to butt heads with whomever, you know, sort of crosses their paths? Is this inevitable?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when I shifted from doing family mediation to workplace mediation, which was all interpersonal relational disputes, and continues in most of that work, I don't do as much mediation. I do mostly coaching now. But what was really stark obvious that hadn't been was the same kinds of interrelationship things happen in the workplace as it does with your home relationships. The same things that are going to bug you. If somebody undermines your values about honesty, they could happen in the workplace too. And so it's some of that self-awareness that comes from coaching is about, I mean, I've had people who have said that they get better at conflict at home because they start to realize what it is that triggers them and why, and they've never told their partner about that or their kids. So I think there isn't that big a difference. I think relationships are relationships. You're going to butt heads wherever you go. People are going to think differently, and you know, vive la différence rather than, you know, thinking this means we have to fight. And at work we think we have, you know, less at stake than we do at home. Well, that's not the case. People can be pretty miserable at work, and if you want to spend, you know, how many hours a day at work and being miserable because you can't stand your coworkers or your team or someone you're working on a project with, and your career's at stake, or you know, whatever. So there's still, I think the similarities are there, and I think what I have found from a lot of, as I did more workplace work over time, was that, you know, that day-to-day needing to get along with people in order to do whatever your chosen field is can make or break your life, how you operate in life, how you live, are you happy at the end of the day? Are you going to go home and take your anger out on your family? So having a better workplace and figuring out how to manage conflict is every bit as important, as in my view, as it is at home.
It seems like we really need an investment in teaching people conflict resolution from a much younger age. Like, it's wonderful that, companies are buying into this and they want to train their staff in order to, whether it's just perform better or retention or what have you. But I mean, we're not teaching kids this, and this is not an innate skill set.
Yeah. So, there is some programs in schools for kids. The thing is, they go home to parents that don't manage conflict well.
I think that's what it is. The parents. Like, I taught kindergarten, and a lot of it was trying to teach the kids to self-regulate and be aware of their own emotions and how their actions affect others and all of those things, and having those discussions even at the kindergarten level. But then again, you go home and maybe you're not seeing the same type of conflict resolution model.
I would love if a kid came home and was like, I hear you saying this, and what I'm interpreting from that is this. Can you please clarify so that we don't have conflict? Like, can you imagine a little 6-year-old being like, well, what I'm hearing is this. Is that what you mean to be saying? I would die 1,000 deaths. But why not? And imagine the parents being like, whoa, okay. That was not what I meant. This was my intent. So talk to us about that difference, intent versus impact, and how can we better understand intent and sort of find that common ground with folks when we are in conflict.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to comment on the kids. There was a great little recording on Instagram or something where a mother says to her kid that she was feeling angry. So she's expressing her anger. And the little boy, he couldn't be more than 5, said, take a deep breath.
Oh,
which is
so true.
I loved it. Intent and impact. Well, I mean, I think what happens once people are triggered, that they experience that values or needs or aspects of their identity are being undermined. Alex, you'd know this from the not so merry-go-round of conflict. The concept that as soon as we are triggered, it's usually because something's feeling undermined, challenged, threatened, that someone has said or done. And we tend to then make an assumption about why they do it. And so that is a common trajectory that people take. It's been identified by people who studied emotional regulation. It's a very common sequence of getting triggered, and then you don't even identify what really is undermining for you, but it is, and then make assumptions about why they do it. And that assumption about the intent is what usually gets us in trouble. We don't stop to say, you just did that. This is how I'm experiencing this. Is that what you meant?
Right.
Or this is what it feels like. Or this is what I'm assuming when you do that.
Yeah.
Even if the person said, yeah, that's what I feel like. I said, well, let's talk about that then. But unless you are clear about it, you operate on assumptions. Yeah. And so the intent gets very mixed up so that the impact is experienced in the way it's perceived, not necessarily the way it is. I think, though, being able to check out with somebody about, did you mean to do this? Because this is how I experienced it. And even if somebody said, yeah, I did, why? Like, what's that about? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And so being able to stay calm enough. I've talked about, the importance of moving from reaction to reflection before you say anything.
I love that.
Like being able to think things out, and then to be able to respond, and to reorganize your thoughts before you respond. Even so, I think the R's. I think of them the R's, so that you can be resilient. Another R, and I think some of that it happens right up what you're talking about with intent and impact. Is as soon as we have misinterpreted, possibly we operate on our interpretation, and it's based on either our former experience or what we've done ourselves or what we see that behavior means, our own histories, without knowing how to check it out. And I think that's a theme for me in conflict is, did you check out if that's what the person meant? And I myself have to figure that out. Is that what they intended? And I think 9 out of 10 times we'd find out their intention might have been to hurt, but because they were hurt.
Right.
Not, and that conversation needs to happen rather than, I intended to do that, or I did intend to do it because I needed to pay you back. well, okay, let's have that conversation.
Exactly.
We just make up a whole lot of other stuff.
We love making up stories.
Yeah, and that's where the emotion, like we said, there is a place for emotion. Emotion is good, but sometimes the emotion in that moment can take over
Clouds.
and your ability to like actually reflect and stay calm and all those things that are great.
Yeah.
But the emotions are so strong. You're feeling so triggered. You're feeling unsafe. You're feeling attacked.
Yeah.
And then that's when more damage is done to the relationship.
Yeah, we really need to ask those clarifying questions. I remember, I think it was Brene Brown, and she says, go to the balcony, like get outside of it, take a new perspective and stay curious, because we do jump to these conclusions. We do make up stories that confirm, whatever biases we have. And so that ability to pause and ask, hey, wait just a minute. So I want to pause here because after I started doing ADR and after I took your course, I actually had a list of questions that I would post in my kitchen, because that's typically where our conflict would arise. So that was where we gathered. Most people
Like
gather
sticky
in the
notes?
kitchen. Yeah, because I couldn't think of those questions when I was in that emotional state. But I knew, like, I believe so much in this work, and I know that this is the way to fight, quote unquote, better. But in that minute, there was not a nary a question in my mind, because I was so, fired
You're in fight
up.
or flight mode, right?
Total reptilian brain. And so, yeah, we would have this like list of questions, and they were fairly basic. It was like, wait, what do you mean by that? Hang on just a second. Can you say that again? Like just these most basic things, but we in the moment can't think of that. So, Cinnie, what kinds of questions should people be asking if you're in the middle of a disagreement, a fight, an argument with somebody? What are just the most basic questions, obviously outside of, can you clarify, that people can use to pause the argument, stay curious, and get those, sort of more clarification around what the other person is intending?
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all, but I would say like a starting point isn't a question. It's a statement that says, okay, I hear you're getting upset. I can see it. It's bugging me too. I'm finding myself getting upset. I just need to pause here for a second. Like just something that stops,
Right.
identifies. Yeah. I hear you upset. It's kind of getting to me too. And I want to know what's going on. I think sometimes it's about what's most important to you about this, or what is it specifically that I did or is happening that I'm hearing a lot. But that's kind of one question that you could be. It might be. I have found more often than not that when clients and myself, if I say something more about it, I need to think about this because I'm reacting to it. But I really want to know what is it that's really important to you here. And I think that question is a good one, because I don't think it's an easy answer to that one.
Right.
It's that you're doing this or that you're doing that. And so, okay, I need to think about it because I don't want to react in a negative way. Just give me a few minutes to think about it. And getting a little break away at that time. And how urgent is it? If someone says we've got to resolve it now, I know we do, and I want to do it in the best possible way. This minute, I need a little break because I'm not going to be able to react the way I want to. Something that gives your brain a break and gives the other person a break is, to me, one of the best things you can do when something happens.
What would you do if someone is in an argument and they're trying to use all these skills? They're using I statements. They're telling the other person, hang on, I need just a minute. But that other person just wants a fight. Like they are just gloves off. They're here for a battle. And for whatever reason, right? We can assume maybe they had a bad day at work, or, they lost their job, or whatever, happened to them. Fine. We can be compassionate. But what do you do when you're the other person who does not want to fight?
Well, I think declaring that. I don't have it in me right now.
Yeah.
I really can't get into this with you, but I want to hear what's going on for you, what's happening, and just be able to listen. It's the hardest thing to do, to listen when somebody's upset, and when they're upset out on you, and it may not be you at all. Could be anything. Yeah. But even if it's you and you're listening to it, like, I think it sounds like, is it a really passive thing to do? It's one of the best things, because if you listen to it kind of patiently, you pick up the nuggets of what's really going on for somebody, so that you can say, that was so much, and it's just getting me more and more upset, but I need to think about, like, how do you do that? It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that, but I've had experience with trying to do that myself with a friend who took me on about something that I thought I couldn't even understand what she was saying. It was so foreign to me, that what she was upset about, and I had no choice but to listen, because I was kind of gobsmacked and kind of going, what? And but a lot of stuff came out, and she kept on talking, and I said, what's going on? Like, what brought all that on? And she had a whole history, and I was so shocked about it and hurt. But the time that I said, I need to think about this, because it doesn't even resonate for me, she didn't stop being angry. And then I went off and I thought about it. I have no really idea about that. And while I was really upset and quite hurt about it, and the relationship actually ended ultimately, because it wasn't mendable at that point, because of the interpretation that she had of a whole lot of things. And that was just shocking to me. But I think that, I think some of it is, I think if I hadn't listened, I wouldn't have heard everything that I needed to hear in order to start to figure out what I needed to do, or how I needed to respond to it. And I think what happens is, when we get upset, is we react and respond to that particular thing the person said at that moment, when there could be a whole lot of other things. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, or this is just the outcome of the root. And sometimes a question like says, what started this? Or, what was it that happened that got you going here? Because I don't even recall, or I wouldn't want to cause that, or that wasn't my intent, or something. But rather than try to defend yourself, is to listen. And it's one of the hardest things you can do at that time.
Yeah, because we do want to defend ourselves. We want to make sure that we're not seen as this, horrible person or what have you in that moment.
I think a lot of people listen to plan their defense rather than listen to actually understand.
Definitely.
And that's such a difficult thing to really grasp, right? Because you are so emotional and all the reasons, right? And just see the way that this person is speaking.
Yeah.
So being able to do that, I think is
and I think
huge.
that's why the questions, like asking those clarifying questions.
You have to want to know.
You have to want to know.
That's the difference. It's like, okay, letting the other person speak is one thing, but actually wanting to genuinely know what's really bothering them is another level that not a lot of people necessarily are at.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what the difference is between like healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, because a lot of our listeners, a lot of our clients are always sort of on the like, do I stay, do I go situation. They're having conflicts, and like we said, conflict's not necessarily a bad thing, but where do you draw the line?
Yeah, so you know what, I think the three of us would draw a line at different places.
Yeah.
So as soon as somebody got abusive with me or hit me or something, I'd be out of there.
Yeah.
But some people will be in that relationship, and that's what they accept, and that's different. What their expectations of our relationships might be different, or what they've been used to as kids, or whatever that might be. So it's hard to know. But I mean, for me, any unhealthy conflict is when people are, shaming, blaming, hitting, hurting, abusing. I know that people stay in those relationships. I've represented, when I was a lawyer, many people who were in abusive relationships, and that some places, the only safe place, people have no idea what they're going to do. They don't see any more safety outside of it than they do inside of it. And there's lots of things that we don't understand about that. But I think that I guess that's the conversation about, what is acceptable. And I don't think we can assume for anybody what's acceptable for them. And operate on that basis. And what you and I, what we'd put up with would be different. And so having a conversation with my clients about that. I've had people in the workplace who put up with what I would think would be really abusive language from a boss that I wouldn't put up with. I would be complaining about it or reacting to, but not always. There'd be a time in my life when I'd go, okay, I'd lose my job if I do that. I better just put up with it. Yeah. And I was too young and didn't know better, or too inexperienced. But some people it's not even a matter of age. It's just, this goes back to the conversation about what you've been brought up with in your family, or what you think is right, is what you go by. And so we can put up with a lot of things that are not healthy. Yeah. And other people would say, that's the price of having a relationship.
Yeah. Do you think people know their threshold, or like in advance, or is it something you experience and then you go, oh no, that is my bottom line.
You're already
now
past
I'm
it.
out. Yeah, you've passed my line.
Yeah, I don't think people always know. I think because we don't have that conversation as we grow up. Like they're conversations that they have in coaching or mediation or someplace, or therapists or something, where it's, what can you put up with? I have a friend who has the most abusive parent and does not see it as abusive. I've been brought up that way. Like, she doesn't know any better. So her family makes a lot of excuses for her.
Right.
And there's lots of reasons for that too, that you'd put up with something. And I think that people don't have, that would not be the threshold, being around a partner that was like that. It would be something different. So I think it is, but I think if you ask the question to somebody, if you were in a relationship, what is it that you will not accept in a relationship, or how do you manage conflict? Well, many people say, I don't know how.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they can't label it.
That's
They don't.
true,
It's more of a feeling rather than an actual tangible thing that they can say, this is my line in the sand.
Yeah.
It's more of how you feel in the relationship.
Yeah. And maybe you don't know until you're in it.
Until you're in it, and you don't no longer feel safe. You no longer feel, you feel more conflict
But
outside of it than inside.
And I think that to that point, I think what happens is that relationships, sometimes you won't have that conversation after 3 or 4 big arguments,
right?
And then all of a sudden you think, okay, we're not doing very well here. But many people won't think about doing that. That fear of losing the relationship, like that what starts to happen is too that people can't identify what it was that was undermined for them. We don't always have these conversations about what values, needs, identity were being undermined here.
Totally.
When you say this, by that time there's a dent being made. And it's how do you recover from that, and what do you need to say to the other person? Because I've seen people that, and including I often coach one person in a couple who's trying to manage conflict better, and I've heard people say things like, "Well, I just kind of got used to it. That's the way they do it, and I don't like it, but I can't change them."
Yeah, I wonder if it's like a snowball where for some folks, it builds over time until you are like, okay, that's it. Or it snowballs in the reverse where you just become so accustomed to it that you then stop being bothered.
Is that the rut, though, that people say, oh, we got into a rut? And I wonder if that's part of this rut that people talk about, that like they have never really addressed maybe the issues. And so they've just been sort of, okay, I guess that's just the way our relationship is, until it bothers them so much that they can't live like that anymore. But they've never actually did the work to like work through it and find better solutions.
Yeah, but I mean, I've seen clients that will see that they don't, we make up, it gets better, we reconcile, even though it might continue that, still there, that kind of, that trash that's being built up that you talked about. And that people can put up with a lot rather than confront what's going on, rather than saying to the other person, every time you do this, it just, what can we do about, like, it just builds up. Even people get used to it. And then that kind of lackadaisical, like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Not going to change that person. And it's not about changing them at all. It's about saying that I won't put up with that behavior and standing up for ourselves. But some people just kind of give up and think, what the heck? I've got this and I've got that and all. But yet they're inside brewing and boiling about what's going on. And that unhealthy relationship ends up in physical health problems or, other kinds of problems that people have. And I think that, I've seen people who wouldn't leave a relationship no matter what. And, and also it may not even be that. It's like putting up with it rather than, does it really matter? And I think knowing what really matters and identifying and being able to share it with the other person is a really good sign of a healthy relationship, and it requires a lot of trust.
Yes.
And I've had clients who will turn around and say, yeah, well, I've tried and I don't trust that they'll honor that. In fact, they'll throw it in my face. And that can happen as well.
So I feel like we've heard a lot lately about love languages. This is really getting its 15 minutes of fame, right? People know, okay, we might have different love languages, so I'm going to try and love you in the way you need to be and vice versa so that, we can make this relationship work. On a similar vein, Cinnie, are there fight languages? Like, are there different fighting styles that there's a lot of conflict because people in relationships have different styles and they're just incompatibly arguing? Or is that a made-up thought?
I like a fight language.
Yeah, fight language.
Yeah, it's a good thought, really. I think that this goes back to the habit. We've all developed different ways to be in conflict. And so we will fall back on that because that's all we know. Yeah. It's the habit, it's the script, it's the way we do that. And so I'm not sure it's chosen specifically with the partner that you're with or the friend you're with. I think it has to do with much sooner than that, much earlier, when in your relationship, your family, that you've learned how to manage conflict.
Right.
And so that is it. Fight language. It's just what you do, and to shift that in order to either accommodate the other person or work it out requires some insight about what are you doing and why are you doing that, and what is it you're trying to achieve here, and how else could you achieve that, and all those good questions that have people start to look at what has become a habit.
Right.
And is it working for you?
Yeah. And so then in that similar vein, how, for those of our listeners that are parents that want to teach their kids better conflict style, what are some like really basic, easy, 101s that parents can do right now today to start having this kind of conversation with their kids and set them up for success?
Those parents, I think, that do some of the healthier things is to talk about, to be child-centered, is to say, what's the message we want to give our kids about how to interact?
Yeah.
And when they're in conflict and in a relationship, do we want them to think that all relationships end in divorce and they're fighting? It is to how do you have that healthy conversation with the help of a counselor, mediator, or coach that said is what's the message you want your kids? Can you get on the same page? Because often couples can be on the same. They don't want their kids to see the argument. They don't want to end up with that anger. It's a conversation to have, and then to say, how do we do it? Like, how do we demonstrate for them? What do we have to do differently here so our kids are going to be healthier?
Yeah.
They're the focus. And I think, sometimes I think in a lot of questions when it comes to family breakups is, what's the legacy here for your kids about relationships and about conflict? What is it and people don't think about that. Yeah. They just, they just kind of go through motions of whatever they've decided to do without thinking that, I've seen lots of people do some very healthy things. They smile, they come in, how are you doing? There's, kids kind of see this. The kids might be wishing the mom and dad are going to get back together again, or mom and bum, or dad, or whatever it is. But that the idea is that kids get a message that says relationships don't have to end up being embittered and awful, and that's what we're going to leave you is that message. So, be careful of relationships because you're going to end up like us. That's how kids are going to think. So I think to me that forms part of the conversation that couples have in mediation or counseling or whatever it is they do about, what can we agree to do? If nothing else about us right now, what can we agree to do for our kids about the message we want them to have about relationships?
Yeah, I like that, the legacy idea. I know I often, when I'm working with clients who are trying to, get some, I don't do obviously counseling, I'm not a therapist, but certainly coaching prior to, deciding whether they want to end their relationship. And I always ask, what's the impact of the kids? And often I'm reminding them that parents typically fight in front of their kids, but they don't make up in front of their kids. And I'm like, you need to close that loop. You need to show children that it's okay to fight, but then we come back and we apologize and we take accountability and we make up, whether it's, kissing in the kitchen or just having a conversation that's not screaming or what have you, that where we're actually now the emotion has come down and we're conversing in a mature, respectful way.
And parents and children of divorce definitely don't see that.
Definitely don't see
there's
that.
more of an opportunity, obviously, if your parents are together and you can see that sort of process. But if they're divorced and they're having a conflict at pickup or whatever, they're not going to see the makeup part of it, if at all. If it happens at all. And if it does happen, it's maybe in a phone call or an email or something, not in front of the kids. So that's an interesting point. It's like, how do you teach your kids, let's say post-divorce, that, mom and I are going to argue about something or we didn't see eye to eye on this, but it's okay. We resolved it and we're good.
Yeah, I think that saying child-centered is really difficult when you're really angry at the other person. So you kind of forget to do that. But I think that to me would be part of a good a mediation or a counseling session would be about, when we disagree and what will we do so the kids know that you can make up so that they get a good impression of what conflict is about and a support for their parents that they were doing. Like what do they have to observe in order to be able to model it? You're modeling this all the time. You're modeling behavior all the time that the kids need to, that they'll benefit from or not. So what can you both agree on? I would think that you can get people to agree more on that than they can agree about a whole lot of other things.
Definitely.
And about what they want. That ongoing message is something that people don't think about very much. Yeah. It's not top of mind. They're trying to work out their stuff between the two of them, not thinking so much about the impact on the kids, ongoing, long term.
And I think they think that if they're fighting for what they think is right, that the kids will automatically. Sorry?
It's worthwhile.
It's worthwhile. It's right, and sometimes that fight isn't always worth it.
No,
because the kids don't. The kids see you in distress, but you're fighting for what's right. But the kids don't see that.
Yeah, or they don't understand.
They don't understand it, right? They don't understand why you're so upset, and so it's hard because you have to sort of. I guess they say pick your battles, but even in divorce, you do, because if you just fought for everything and fought on everything, then what are you showing your kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had I know these family members. It was such a good lesson with because I knew them over time, and there were two boys that were when they were young. Mom never talked about their father, who was really hard on her, and it was a really tough. She said, I didn't talk about them. I didn't talk about them. And one of those kids who I came to mentor over time said to me, I never quite knew what happened there. And I feel like I was left out of understanding what really happened and how we figured into it. And the talking to your kids about conflict or about, yes, we didn't get along, but we figured out a way to do anything. But the actual not talking at all about was a whole huge gap. He said that he really felt this, wasn't quite sure when he was going to have relationships about, as he was getting older, around what do you trust? What do you know? What do you learn? What have you and I thought, whoa, I never quite thought about parents thinking they're protecting their kids, but I'm never going to talk about the parent,
Yeah. It's so true.
It's their parent,
It's so true. And it even reminds me of why we have open adoption now. It's the kids need to know, even if it's difficult. The answers are better than the non-answers. And I think we need to look at that for conflict as well.
It depends, though, on the answer. I mean, if you're talking about why the parents broke up, they don't always need to know that. Do they need to know that one parent was unfaithful or one parent had an addiction problem or those type of things? Do they need to know that?
Yeah, I mean, age appropriate honesty, certainly, but...
I think if there are situations that they want to protect the kids from, that's a conversation for the couple to have. To say, to be able to say, I'd rather them not know that you're, drug addicted. And, what will we say to them? That can be a really good conversation to have because the person drug addicted may not want that conversation to happen either. So,
or they may want it because
when their children are maybe adults and can understand it, and they can talk, but not when they're 8 years old. No, they don't need to know that.
But kids always assume. Well, no, maybe not always. Okay, there's often instances in divorce where kids feel like it's their fault. Right. That if they were a better behaved child or if they did better at school or got, whatever, then the parents would have stayed together. So I think in those circumstances, it is really important, whether you're giving the full truth, but just to say, listen, this has nothing to do with you.
Take the blame away. Yes. Put the blame, own the blame.
They need some answers.
To own it, that we too are responsible for the, dissolution of this, not you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a conversation to have in any case, right? And, whatever the reason is to be able to sit with them together. It's having that conversation. I actually coached somebody who was wanting to go to their partner about how to have that conversation with their kids because a year had gone by and the kids are asked a lot of questions and my client said we need to be on the same page about what's going on and what to do, and went back in a very fractious relationship, and it was the one thing they could agree on. And it actually started to open up other conversation about what they were going to say to the kids together. Oh, I love that. It was the first time the kids had seen the parents together. And I guess one of them just cried and said, are you getting back together? And they said, no, but we want you to know it had nothing to do with you. And it's something that we're working out. Well, that was pretty emotional for the kids to hear that. So, to your point, absolutely. Too many parents do that and walk away and think, well, they saw what was going on, or they assume, or they might say it has nothing to do with you. But if they do it together, it's really powerful.
I always encourage my clients when they're in the early stages to do it together, if possible, where possible. Yeah.
So, Cinnie, just in wrapping up, then, and this is a hard one, but if you could give our listeners one tip to improve their conflict and to teach them how to fight better, what would you say that would be?
Yeah, I don't think I would tell people how to fight better. I think I would say is
healthier, fight healthier.
take some deep breaths. Don't react. Like, figure out a way to shift your brain, and before you have a conversation, and ask for time out.
Yeah.
To think about it. And I think it's. I mean, it kind of boils down to, how do you not react, and how even own it. I don't want to react here. I just need to think about it, and to do that before you do any kind of reaction. I think that's probably one of the biggest tips I would have.
I love that.
The timeout is the number one thing. I think workplace offers you sometimes the timeout because you can go home and or you have the weekend to sort of process what you've done, or maybe you don't send the email. But when you're at home, it's harder to get the timeout. Yeah. But I think that's so important.
Yeah.
It is hard, but it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be. If you start to build that into, how you interact, then I think it becomes
go
part
for a
of
walk. It's like we're arguing. We're not going to discuss this until later. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to go for a drive, whatever, go into a different room, take some time and then come back to it. Yeah. Not push it under the rug, but just come back.
Time out. I love it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
And Cinnie, if people want to work with you, if they want to hire you for coaching or for whatever, how do they find you? Where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the company's Synergy, Cinergy Coaching. And just if you Google that, you will find it. And it's Cinnie at synergycoaching.com. You'll see that email to get hold of me.
Awesome.
And actually, I'm happy to gift your guests who listen to this. I've written a book called Conflict Mastery Questions to Guide You. And they're kinds of questions that you can ask yourself. You might have seen that book, Alex. So it gives different topics like blaming and criticizing and a little bit about it, and then 12 questions to ask. And the chapter 2, you can download it for free if you go to my website and look under resources. And the password is getfreechapter.
Love it.
Capital G,
Love
capital
that.
F,
Thank
capital
you.
C.
Okay, we'll put that in our show notes as well. That is so kind. Thank you, Cinnie. How wonderful. And I do have that book. And for those who are wondering, I have taken your course. It is amazing. You have such an incredible perspective on conflict and relationships. And we're so delighted to have had this opportunity to chat with you. So thank you so much.
It was lovely to see you again, and I appreciate being asked. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Be well. Take care.
Be well.
Thank you.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver, produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.